Just like usual, throughout the summer, it gets a little bit warmer. It's a little bit nicer to look outside and see things that are outside and be outside. And we wish we could have come with everybody to Fisherman's Bend to enjoy that too. But it's just magical almost looking outside and seeing everything just alive and well and not dreary like it usually is. Then again, if you live in Central Oregon, we have relatives, I have relatives that live in Central Oregon. Every time we go and visit them, we notice just weird things like the sidewalk doesn't have mold on it, everybody's houses, like, they don't have moss on them, and we kind of, and everybody looks a little bit more tan than we do in the winter. We always come looking sort of like a fish, and everybody over there is nice and brown and tan and everything. But over here, during the summer, it's just, it makes it so easy to worship God, am I right? At least for me. And so this week, I'm going to talk about rediscovering worship. And maybe you're someone, this could be challenging, by the way. Maybe you're someone that knows what worship is. You've got it. You've got the game plan down, right? And you know how you as a person worship. Maybe you're someone that, you come to church every Sunday and that is how you worship. Maybe there's a musical instrument that you play throughout the week and that's how you worship. I'm going to be tackling hopefully all of those avenues and then hopefully giving a little bit more that I've kind of discovered about myself that I really didn't know about myself. First, worship has a history because everything does. Worship does, especially in the United States. And it kind of started with the period of the Second Great Awakening. It's kind of when people in the United States in the 1800s kind of sat down and went, we, as good, in a lot of cases, what we now consider Lutherans, right, the departure from Catholicism, how do we worship? How do we do this thing? And they kind of wanted to depart from strict things that had been practiced throughout their lives, which really date back to Catholicism. And if you don't believe me, in my dealings with Lutherans and having worship with Lutherans in summer camp form and at their own churches and that kind of thing, they actually pay homage, or I don't know how to pronounce that word. Wow, that's alarming. To the Catholic Church every time they worship. They actually say, and praise be to the Holy Catholic Church is one of the things that they say before they worship every Sunday. So it's definitely, it's all interconnected there. But the Catholics even actually date their worship back to the Jews. And this is how the Jews worshipped, and still worship this way, by the way, in their synagogues. So Jewish tradition involves going to a temple. That is how you worship. Whenever worship is talked about among the higher-ups of the Jewish religion today, they talk about going to a temple. And when you go to a temple, there's certain things you have to do or else you're not worshiping. For example, you have to read from the Torah. And there's certain things you read from the Torah based on certain parts of the year. It's kind of like, let's see, what day is it? It's kind of like an Advent calendar, right? Except there's no chocolate. Sorry. And you kind of open that up and go, what should we do today? And you read through that section of what you're going to do today. And then you sing a song or you give a chant that kind of has to do with what you just read. And it kind of varies throughout the year. Make sure your shoes are off, by the way. That's important. The other thing is that you should also, when you come into this place, you have to get yourself, I actually really agree with this, you have to get yourself right with God first before you go and worship. We talked about this last week. That's actually very biblical when it's talked about if you have something wrong with someone, go make that right with somebody and come and worship. Bring your worship. Worship is a gift. Bring your gift before God. Worship is a gift. If you have something, if you and God are not good at the beginning of a Sunday, get yourself right with God before you worship. And that's just generally a good thing to do, right? So I really agree with that one. So in the Great Awakening, that kind of all went away, as of course, there were a lot of Catholics in the United States, but there were even more Protestants in the United States, calling themselves, Lutheran, or it just started to devolve into the various things that we now know as the Protestant Reformation. And the Great Awakening was a call to action against something the nation was going through. The nation was full of, and to kind of quote the documentary by, same guy that made the documentary called The Civil War. Burns. Thank you, Ken Burns. The nation was a pagan, destructive force of evil consisting of drunken revelry. And that's kind of what it was. Everybody drank. That's kind of the way of the Irish immigrants, the Scottish and English immigrants, and especially the German immigrants that had come over. And that's just the way things were, and it kind of was getting out of control for the people that were there, and so a lot of things were happening throughout the United States, but one of them was the Second Great Awakening. And in that, people were saying, come back to church. Worship began to be a little bit more what we call corporate, meaning everybody does it all at once. Well, this went on for years and years and years, and kind of how it came about. We began to have books of hymns where, now these are all hymns that we all know, and we sing them throughout the year. And then the 60s happened. And in the 60s, everybody began to be a little bit disenchanted with a lot of things in the United States, but especially the movement of hippies began to take over. And the hippies, they were big into music, freeing everything. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, digressing to Christians. Christians looked at the hippies and went, uh-oh. And I remember talking to several people in my family that actually went through this and remember what I'm about to talk about, and kind of went, yeah, we really needed to do something in the church. Because the church was over here, and the hippies were, you could see like a mile in that direction. And they kind of looked at the hippies and went, we need to do something. They're all... We need to cater to them a little bit more and meet them where they are. The hippies were big into a life-changing philosophy, right? A big thing that will open up your entire life and make you more free. Turns out Jesus does that too. So the Christians evolved with the times, and they created the Jesus People movement. And, Jesus People, some people called these the Jesus freaks, mostly the diehard hippies that were over here being deadheads and things. They called these the Jesus freaks, and basically the Jesus People movement. So they're actually big festivals. I'm not old enough to have actually witnessed this, so if you did, come and talk to me about it later, because all I did was read about it and watch a bunch of things about it. But this is crazy, right? This is crazy. In the middle of hippieism, and in the middle of a country being kind of torn apart, we had people, there's a picture of Jesus being held up almost, it's a concert atmosphere, almost in protest, right, of the way that things are going. And there's a sign that says one way, this way. And that's how we got modern worship. Modern worship came from this. All of a sudden, there began to be more of an organic, harmonious thing to worship. Let me explain. Gone began to be hymns, because the younger generation was departing from them. So, a lot of Christian leaders said, it's not that they're bad, I mean, we should still use them in churches, but we should also factor in this, younger generation of music. It started way back in the 60s. And it was more charismatic in the way of appealing to younger people. And as younger people began to listen to these songs, it actually created two things. It created not only this new segment of Christian worship that had actually repeatable choruses and things that really mimicked modern pop culture music, but really it also branched into something completely different called CCM, which is contemporary Christian music, which is something the world had never seen before. Music specifically for and by Christians to reach people that were not Christians. And actually I had some pictures of this, but I forgot to put them on. I went to one of these concerts. There was a band called Audio Adrenaline. They came to town with a guy named Jeremy Camp. There was also a band in there called Hawk Nelson, and they were kind of like in the middle, I remember, of between Christian and non-Christian, because they definitely had songs that were to appeal to a teenage movement, yet had Christ kind of injected into them. But the cool thing is, I took my friend, I had an atheist friend, always have an atheist friend for some reason. This guy's name was Taylor, and I took Taylor to one of these concerts by this band, Audio Adrenaline, and this guy's standing up and he's screaming about Jesus and everything like that, and everyone's like, yeah, and everything, and it was really loud worship, is all I can say. It was just really loud worship. And this guy was digging it. He was going, man, where has this been? He bought the album. And I was thinking, this guy is a die-hard atheist. There's nothing he wants. He came to that concert, I am convinced, specifically to go, what are you doing? This is weird, Geoff, come on. But he loved it. He was all into it. And in fact, he was singing along worship choruses with his Christian buddies who he came there to devalue. Isn't that cool? God can use so many things, and CCM, contemporary Christian music, actually was one of those things that God can use. And CCM is going away. It's not a bad thing. It's just that CCM then began to come into more of a church realm. Churches wanted to use the music. The problem with CCM, Christian music, contemporary Christian music, is that it mirrored pop music so much that there were not worshipful choruses. Meaning, if you go back to Psalms, there are not choruses that reflect my journey, meaning it could really work for everybody in relation to me worshiping Jesus. It actually was someone else's, it was a singer and songwriter's view of the world and kind of their walk with Christ too. Nothing wrong with that, of course. You can kind of tell where people are with that. It was their way of worshiping, but it didn't work in a church sense. So, the band, you might have heard of them, this band called Cutlass, came out with a worship album. They took old school worship songs and they put them into heavy metal music, believe it or not. And you can actually look it up on Spotify or Pandora or something like that, YouTube. There is their album, their first worship album was actually one of the best sellers in contemporary Christian music, remained on the top of the charts for about 3 years. And actually people really got into this. And it kind of spawned this new period of Christian music. CCM, contemporary Christian music, began to kind of leave the forefront, and people began to listen in their cars, when they were running, walking, what have you, doing stuff around the house or just at work. They began to listen to worship-centered music, music played by worship bands and churches. And now we're experiencing, in the United States, we're experiencing the rise of mega-church worship. Bands like Elevation Worship, Bethel Music, started with Hillsong and Hillsong United, now Hillsong Young and Free. Churches making music for people to listen to, and actually recording it and having it play on the radio. This has never happened in our history. I think it's so cool that God is using this new generation to do these things. Now, there's going to be problems. Whenever this happens, there's going to be problems. And in fact, there was one, and I had to talk to my friend Chris about this. We had a long talk about this because he was a seminary student. There was a song that came out called "Reckless Love," and it's by Bethel Music. "Reckless Love," you might have heard of it. One of the verses goes, "Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. How it chases me down, fights till I'm found, and leaves the 99. Of course, it's talking about leaving the 99 sheep, right, to go and find the one. That's what he's talking about. But there are a lot of people in the church that had a problem with this and said, "Oh, we've gone too far. We have left where we needed to be." Let me zoom in on a verse here. If you didn't hear it the first time, it says, "Oh, the overwhelming," nothing wrong with that, God's love is overwhelming, right? "Never-ending," nothing wrong with that, right? God's love is never-ending. "Reckless love of God." Oh no. The reckless love of God. Oh, we have a problem now, right? Because God is not reckless. God is very calculated. Everything he does is for a purpose, right? This was a problem. This is a big problem. In fact, when we were at Horizon actually had to address this problem, this very thing. And in fact, this song became something that divided people. Weirdly enough, a worship song dividing people. Let me explain what this was. This was a mixture of CCM, contemporary Christian music, and worship music. What this writer was actually going through, if you read his story, he was going through a hard time in his life, and he couldn't figure out why God kept coming after him. He couldn't figure out why God kept bringing him signs that things were going to work out. And he couldn't, even though he himself was not following God, he could not believe that God would continue to love him. That was the journey of this guy. Kind of makes more sense now, doesn't it? And if you go back to the story of the 99 sheep, the parable that Jesus tells, he says, let's say that a shepherd loses a sheep. Back then it would have happened. You would be one shepherd with a whole flock of sheep just because it's more expensive to have more shepherds. In fact, sometimes shepherds would combine their herds, but in this case he only mentions one shepherd. Usually meaning God, right? Usually when there's a parable, there's God and us. We're the sheep. These dumb animals. It's kind of funny that guy when you say that. Anyway, that's hilarious to me. But the shepherd loses one sheep. One. He's got 99 more. He's with them currently. And Jesus asked the question, wouldn't you, as a shepherd, wouldn't the shepherd go out and go get that sheep? What you all should say, and what I don't think is brought up a lot in our culture, in relation to what was happening with that shepherd, no, you wouldn't go out. It's one measly sheep. For all I know, the thing could have wandered off several times, and good riddance, because that sheep is going to endanger you, right? Because you don't know, that sheep could have been carried off by anything. A lot of wolves could have carried off that sheep, and here you are as a shepherd going off, by the way, leaving the other 99 of your sheep to go and find that sheep. But you know what that says about that shepherd? That shepherd loves that sheep more than a lot of us love people. And I think that's what Jesus was saying. He was saying, my love to you looks reckless. Doesn't the song now make more sense? Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. That's kind of cool because it's a journey of someone in worship. Today I'm going to read Psalm 145. And I should digress because really I'm talking about, not there yet. Usually when we talk about worship, we're only talking about music. And I think that's too bad. Let me kind of tell you a story before we get into Psalm 145. Usually when I talk about worship, I'm thinking about music too. That's why it was really easy to talk about this. I remember these things happening at Canby Christian when I used to worship there and kind of play piano there. I remember the first time I got up on stage and played piano in front of people and how scared I was and how silent I played. And then all of a sudden when God began to take over, how all of a sudden, you can't describe it, it's like the Spirit moving within you and you are just playing your heart out for God. And that's how I worship the best, is by music. But music isn't the only way one worships. Sometimes it's good to kind of take a look through the classics, right? That's why we're going back to Psalms. They're all classics to me. So I've read all of them at some point, but they all speak to me different in different days. And this week, I had an experience. Let me tell you, it was amazing. I stepped, by the way, I'm kind of training for Hood to Coast right now, so a lot of running going on. And I stepped out of the door. It was morning. Did not want to run at all. In fact, wanted to go back inside and spray some water on myself, and Carrie come in and say, oh, good run, huh? I go, yeah, I worked out today. I'm kind of tired when you sit down a little bit. I was thinking about doing that. I was really thinking about doing that. And I sat down on the steps to tie my shoes in front of the house. Whenever I have to do that, it's always bad, because usually it's like, on, tie, go, right? If I'm ever sitting there going, I need some time to tie my shoes. My shoes need to be the right tightness. That means I'm really putting off doing this. And so I'm sitting down there and tying my shoes and stuff, and looking across the street, I'm looking down the street, and I'm thinking about stuff, and I'm not wanting to do this at all. And I get running. It's a day that looks a lot like today, actually. And normally I'd be kind of miserable because it was real humid, there's no wind or anything like that. I decided to go on one of my favorite runs. I went down Territorial Road in Canby. If you go down Territorial Road and you go all the way to the end, almost all the way to where 99 hits on the far east end of town, there's actually a little trail that not many people know about. Don't go there, it's fine. Anyway, so you take a left and you go by these houses. It doesn't look like a trail, but all of a sudden there's this little parking lot that could maybe park like 2 or 3 cars. I found this by accident one time. And it's actually a park that is owned by the wastewater treatment area, but it's open to the public. And there's this little trail that goes through it. And so about 3 miles there, and you get on that trail and stuff, and all of a sudden there's no cars, the birds are singing, there's sunlight coming through the trees, you can hear Willamette and all of its horrible gloriousness, and you kind of, one time it actually smelled like a ham sandwich, like the river did. I should tell you something about the Willamette. Anyway, but you're running along the river, and it is amazing. And all of a sudden, I was running by the river, I ran into the woods by there's a disc golf course and everything down there, and they have cleared out part of the blackberry bushes that used to be in front of the river. The river opened up, the sun was beaming down on it, and next thing I knew it, I was standing there with the most dopey look on my face. I don't know how long I had been standing there, and I was just saying thank you to God. Over and over and over again. Kind of like an idiot. I was just like, thank you, God, for the river. Thank you for feet. I love feet. Thank you for running. Oh my goodness, man, I smell bad. Thank you for sweat. And I was just going on and on and on. It's just the dopiest thing ever. And it was amazing. I loved it. I was standing there. Finally, I was like, I'll pause my watch, right? Because I gotta do the right amount of time, or it didn't happen. And I finally got running again. It must have taken me, I must have stood there for 10 minutes with my mouth open, just praising God. When's the last time that's happened? For me, it's been a long time. It was amazing. And it wasn't music. It had nothing to do with music. It was my life pouring out to God. And let me tell you, the rest of that run, all the rest of the miles of that run were amazing. I didn't have to say anything. My spirit was in communication with God, and God had made my body to do exactly what it was doing, and it was doing that in praise of God. I even read my mile splits when I came home, and I was running slower. I had slowed down to appreciate my God who made me to do this. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. In Psalm 45, it says this: I will exalt you, O God the King. I'll praise your name forever and ever. Every day I will praise you and extol your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom. One generation commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts. They speak of the glorious splendor of your majesty. And I will meditate on your wonderful works. They tell of the power of your awesome works, and I will proclaim your great deeds. They celebrate your abundant goodness and joyfully sing of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and rich in love. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. All your works praise you, Lord. Your faithful people extol you. They tell of the glory of your kingdom and speak of your mights, that all people may know of your mighty acts and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Notice so far, this is David, by the way. Notice so far, David has not said sing but once. He said sing once. The rest of it is different, right? Proclaim, right? Proclaim is to say, to yell, to exclaim something. Extol, meaning to lift up God and all the things that you do in your life. He only said sing once. It would seem to me that he's talking about a life lived in praise. In fact, if you go to another place in the Bible, by the way, before we leave Psalm 145, spend some time with that psalm. I read that psalm once a day, every day last week, and it really changed things to start the day. I think I'm going to start reading Psalms every day, because Psalms, even though I've read it for academic purposes before, Psalms is worship. And you can't help but worship if you're reading Psalms. You can't help but stop and go, man, that's cool. You can't help but just, everything just dissolves, and your legalistic view of everything and your view of what you need to do that day or what you need to ask God for and stuff, all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're saying thanks to God. And if you've never said a prayer that was just thank you for this, thank you for that, thank you for feet, right? If you've never done that before, I encourage you to do that after reading Psalms. It is an experience, and it is worship. It is truly worship, and I just experienced that last week. But in 2 Samuel 6, 12 through 22, there's a story. This is David, by the way. Notice that David doesn't look very kingly right now. David is in front of this procession carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And if you ever see your king doing this, you might want to, if you're back in the olden days, you might want to get a new king, right? Because although he looks, and in that picture he looks just shredded, right? Your king does not look very kingly this way. He's wearing his undergarments. He's out in the street in his underwear, folks, and he's praising God. So this is how that went down. 2 Samuel 6, 12-22. Now, King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God." Backstory, what actually happened was, the ark was coming in to Israel. And David had incorrectly told his men how to carry it, right? This is how you're supposed to carry the ark. You're supposed to carry the ark with 2 people in front, 2 people in back, and there's specific regulations on how you're supposed to hold the thing because the glory of God is in that box, right? The glory of God is all around that box. You cannot be near that box unless you are ceremonially clean. You cannot touch it. David decided to put it on a cart and bring it into town. Not the smartest move ever, because the cart began to tip over. One of his guys touched it. God immediately killed that guy because the glory of God was in that box and he was unclean. He couldn't be anywhere near that box. So David ends up bringing the ark to this guy's house named Obed-Edom. And he says, "Yes, I will house the ark of the Lord." And his family was immensely blessed by it. So David then, a few days later, starts bringing the ark into town. So David went up to bring the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, that's that thing, David was dancing before the Lord with all of his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window, and when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart, right? How dare the king be dancing before the Lord in his underwear? That's not a good thing. We can't have that. That's not very legalistically correct, right? They brought the ark of the Lord. I'm not saying, by the way, to dance in your underwear in front of the Lord, by the way, but, if you want to, do it in your own house. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. This is a man truly worshiping God, right? He's taking care of his people. He's dancing half naked before the Lord. He's just having fun with everybody. He's giving people gifts and things like that. This is a guy really worshiping God. He says he was dancing with all of his might through the city. But there's a backlash because someone took offense to that. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today." This is, of course, just being sarcastic. "Going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. How dare you? There are children present. What are you doing?" That's basically what that meant, right? I think this story is amazing, by the way. David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me rule over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord." In fact, in verse 22 he says this, "I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes." Worship is yourself falling away in honor of God the King. It's nothing else. Anything in your life that does that is worship. Not necessarily music, not necessarily running. If you don't run, more power to you. It's terrible. But if there's something in your life that gives that much honor and glory to God and gives you that much joy, do it to the fullest. Do it to just excess, right? That is praise and glory and honoring our God. It should make you feel just amazing to do that in honor for our God. And David is saying, it felt so good to humiliate myself like that. I'm going to do it even more. In fact, when we were in youth group, when I was about 14, there was a song that came out about that verse that says, I will become more undignified than this. Some would say it's foolishness. And when you would sing the song, it's like a camp chant, right? You would stand up and jump and turn around and high-five people and start dancing like a crazy person. And if you ever want to see people worshiping, summer camp at Camp Wainema, when all of those kids would come together and sing that song, it was just about testing the seismic limits of the building that it was in, because all these kids were just having an amazing time worshiping God in full view of everybody else, not standing like this or, raising, this is called the Mufasa when you're, and then, you hold the TV if you're worshiping. Sometimes you go widescreen. And then here's the filter. But they weren't doing any of that. They were just jumping and dancing around and whooping it up and everything like that. And that was worship for them. And that was amazing. Psalm 96, again, Psalms. Psalm 96 says, give to God the glory he deserves. Bring your offering and come into his courts. Worship the Lord in all of his holy splendor. Let all the earth tremble before him. Tell all the nations the Lord reigns. The world stands firm and cannot be shaken. He will judge all peoples fairly. In Christianity today, worship should not be the slow song that the choir sings. It shouldn't even be the fast contemporary song that the mega church sings, right? These are acts and expressions of worship, but they don't define what true worship is. True worship is defined by the priority we place on God above ourselves through a lifestyle of making him greater than us. I encourage you this week to do two things. First of all, pray one prayer that is just thank you. Just one. Just try it. Just try it tomorrow. Try it on Monday. You will not be able to do it just once. In fact, try while driving. Don't close your eyes. I tried that. Never mind. Don't close your eyes because cruise control doesn't do that. What you should do, though, is you should do it in the car because things come by in the car. You'll start thanking God for the dopiest things. And all of a sudden, God and you are in communication. It's a beautiful thing. You'll start thanking God for the barn. You start thanking God for trees and birds and crazy things like that, right? I started thanking God for apples one time while going by an orchard. I was thanking God for how amazing apples were. And it was the most amazing thing. Do that once. Second thing, see if you can read a psalm every day this week. That might be hard. That might be more difficult, just letting you know, because some of them are long. But pick a psalm, doesn't matter where, flip through, pick a psalm. Some of them are a bit of a downer because David was going through some stuff, but those will speak to you in a different way. Some of them are amazingly worshipful, like the ones we just talked about today, and those will elevate you in a way that you have never experienced before. Even if you've read them before, it's always good to do those things. Do those two things this week and see what God does in you. Let's pray. God, I thank you for worship. I thank you for this gift of us extolling you, of making you greater than ourselves and making you above everything. God, I pray that throughout this week you continue to impress upon me how important that is and how to do that in different ways than I've ever experienced. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.